Hey guys, DJ here at Top Tech Cards and Games, and today I'm going to give kind of my first reactions to the new Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Limited list, which just came out. I just saw the list maybe 15 minutes ago. I haven't really even had time to sit down and really think about it for myself. These are legit just my very first reactions. In front of me I have all the cards that were changed in any capacity on the list. First thing I want to talk about are the bans, because I think these are the biggest changes, obviously. Banning Jin is honestly the only thing that I thought last format needed to be a fine format. I don't think Jin is good for the game in any capacity, and even just if you banned Lava Chain, which also happened, Jin still would have been a problem just with Armageddon Knight. But taking Jin out of last format really fixes a lot of the problems, in that it removes the catch-22 of having to play Jin outs in your deck, but your Jin outs are crappy cards if your opponent doesn't summon Jin. So it makes deck building much better. You have to play a lot less junk, and you have to worry less about playing a deck that needs a special summon because your opponent won't be able to Jin you turn one. Lava Chain has not done anything constructive for the game ever. Infernities were obviously broken and they had to be banned or limited, just nerfed to crap. Jin was obviously broken, needed banned, and these are things that were all problems because of Lava Chain. Lava Chain has just never done anything healthy, even in like heroes and stuff. Like, just everything Lava Chain does isn't good. It's an enabler. The blue-blooded Oni deck is obviously a huge problem. Just that it exists even, not necessarily that it's good, but it just shouldn't happen. So these are both good changes for the sake of the game. A lot of people probably would have wanted to see Necros just dismantled and Jin left because they just don't like the deck, but Jin's just always going to be a limiter on the card pool because it really, really inhibits future design on ritual monsters, since as long as Jin exists, if there's a good ritual deck, it's going to become degenerate because you can just summon Jin turn one. And that's not good. So these were great changes. The next are the limits. We have Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, and Shuret, both limited. Limiting Shuret is a really reasonable change to Necros. It makes the deck harder to play, gives it less long game inevitability because you're going to run out of Shurets since you only have one unless you really manage them well or play ways to recycle them. And it just makes it harder to find, even if it's just slightly, because you're going to play Reinforcements of the Army still in some capacity, I'm sure. And I think that's really good for the game. I think Shuret is a very strong card. It's one of the best cards in Necros, and this just makes the deck harder to play rather than actually killing it. Unbanning Trishula, rather, is a pretty cool change. Trish is a really fun card to play with. You have to synchro with 3 monsters to make it, and then it does the same thing as Necros Trishula, removing a card from each zone, hand, field, graveyard, from your opponent. I think this is a cool change when you look at it with one of the other changes, the semi-limited Atlantean Dragoons. There's a reasonable possibility to play it at Mermails with Deep Sea Diva and Genex Controller. And then maybe there's some sort of plant shenanigans you can do to summon Trish somewhere. I don't know. I think that's one of the things to mess with at the very beginning of the format, is just finding a deck that can summon Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier consistently, and what that deck can do with it. It's not necessarily going to be broken or anything, but I think there is plenty of room for activities to really experiment with it and see what your deck can do. And I think that'll be one of the big things at the start of the format. Like, someone's going to find a deck that, or even an engine in an existing deck perhaps, that abuses Trish really well. And that player is going to instantly have an advantage because Trishula is a really good card. We've obviously seen how good Necros of Trishula is, and having Trishula in every deck is just going to buff any deck that can make it. On our semi-limits, we have Atlantean Dragoons and Dragon Ravine. Dragon Ravine, I think, will end up at 3 in the near future. It was only ever hit because of Dragon Rollers. I don't think the Dragoonity deck on its own is any sort of problem, and as long as the Dragon Rollers are banned, I don't think there's any reason that Ravine can't go to 3. If Dragoonities end up being broken, I'll eat my words, but I don't see that happening. Dragoons is a pretty needed buff to the Mermail deck, I think. Going to 2, the deck's never going to be as oppressive as it was when it had 3 of everything and it could do whatever it wanted. But 2 Dragoons is a pretty reasonable number. Even if it went back to 3, it wouldn't break the deck by any stretch compared to the stuff we deal with nowadays. But it is a big buff to a deck that's fairly underpowered right now by comparison. Mermails do a lot of cool things, but it couldn't really keep up with the current state of the game. And I think this is just the buff it needs. I think with this, and if you can find a way to really utilize Trish in your Mermail deck, you're going to have a pretty cool deck that's definitely able to compete. On the Unlimits, 3 of them are cards that got unbanned when they were errated, and they're not going to make any impact at 3 most likely either. However, they did have to go from 1 to 3. They were errated, obviously. They were unbanned after their text got changed to make them fair cards instead of broken cards. And, I mean, they're just not going to make a huge impact. So Nothing really to say about these. These cards are all very average now. I think Temple is pretty cool. I think you still get to play, what, one trap return? You can send... Yeah, you can activate one trap card at the turn it was set. So, I mean, that's neat if you have some sort of combo deck that can abuse it, but, you know, it's not going to be insane or anything. And then we have Glow Up Bulb being unlimited. The Glow Up Bulb change is a pretty big deal. Just kidding. It doesn't do anything. Bulb never needed to be limited in any way, shape, or form. The once per turn effect, or limit on its effect, once per game limit on its effect, really hindered it from being a broken card at more than one. Nobody played more than one Bulb, even when Bulb was an insane card. Like, you get the one copy in your graveyard, you use its effect, and after that it's a vanilla level 1 tuner. Which you don't really need more of. Plants have access to other level 1 tuners and stuff. Like, they don't need more Glow Up Bulbs just for the sake of them being Glow Up Bulb. So, that's a fine change. And then the last one is Sacred Sword of 7 stars. Sacred Sword is a reasonably generic card draw spell, being able to remove a level 7 monster to draw 2 cards. It's only once per turn, so it's not broken in the sense of powering through your deck, really. The Dragon Rollers are banned, so it doesn't generate inherent card advantage just by you activating it. And other than that, it's just a reasonable draw 2 spell. I mean, Destiny Draw, Trade In, all these cards are at 3 and just fine. You can only use one of these per turn. It's not going to like power through you to any sort of FTK. If you had a combo deck that happened to play level 7 monsters, you might play one of these to reduce bricks, but you know, you're probably not going to play 3 in any deck that exists right now. A deck could come up that uses all 3, but you know, I don't really see that as being a problem. So what did this really change for the current format, though? The big changes are really these 5 cards. And I think you can kind of look at it in these maybe 2, maybe 3 piles if you want to separate these guys. The first is the nerfing to Necros, which is a pretty big deal for the current format. The deck is a little bit too good in present-day Yu-Gi-Oh!, obviously. But removing the lock aspect of the deck and just removing Lava Chain from it is a pretty big nerf in general. It lets you build your deck more accordingly. You don't have to be able to deal with the Jhin lock and their ritual plays and their Trish plays. You know, you're kind of limited. You have to deal with the beatdown aspect of the deck, the card advantage aspect of the deck, but you don't have to deal with a lock other than maybe Vanity's Emptiness. Speaking of Vanity's Emptiness, that and Skill Drain are cards that I wouldn't have mind to see just go away. Vanities will never be healthy. Obviously, if Jin's not going to be healthy, Vanity's Emptiness isn't going to be healthy. And Skill Drain is fine, actually, but we have a very fixed version of the card with Lose a Turn, which I think is much more reasonable. But that's neither here or there. That's not what we got. And then the last nerf to Necros being Shuret. This means you can play the deck a lot like you played it before, but you have to play it tighter or use different techs in order to really make use of the Shuret that you have. And I think this is just a change for the better for the deck as well. I think Necros is going to survive through this just fine and be a good deck. And then we have the changes to Mermails, more or less. The extra Dragoons gives Mermails a lot of the power it had before. It is still short of Dragoons, but it gets the addition of Trishula. If you can find a way, and I say find a way like it'll be hard, Summon Diva with any level 4 in play is a way to make Trish, so you're definitely going to be able to use Trish if you put Diva back into your deck, and Gen X Controller with a level 2 and a level 4 is it also, so you know, if you played a Gen X engine or a Diva in your deck, it's very easy to make. So I think Mermail's maybe not competitive, but much more playable. And then the last change that really affects the format is just Trish in general. Decks that can make Trish are instantly better than they used to be. We've seen how format warping Necros of Trishula is, having to make sure you don't lose so much card advantage to it. And in general, decks are going to try to make Trish now, and that's going to be a key thing to the format. So those are things to watch out for. Just when you're brewing up a new deck, those are the things to think about anyway. Like, you don't have to beat Jhin. You don't have to deal with as much of a long inevitability from Necros. I mean, they'll change their deck to try to keep the same amount of inevitability, but we'll see where they actually get on that. And then, as far as Trishula goes, you should try to make a deck that can summon it, and if not, just have your plan for playing against it. The existing decks other than Necros weren't touched at all, which is something that I find very interesting. Shaddolls, Burning Abyss, Klee, not touched. I don't think that any of them actually needed touched. I think Necros gets better against all of those decks just by not having to nerf its own deck in order to not lose to the Jhin in the mirror. So now all those tech spots that you spend on Book of Eclipse, Regeki, these kind of things, now Necros decks can use real cards in those slots, which I think is really cool. So you'll be able to actually be prepared to play against Backrows and Dantes and Shaddoll monsters. One of the awkward things is that if you cut your Jin outs, you cut all your Annoy-litis outs as well. Annoy-tis, I don't know that card's name still, I'll be real. And I think that's fine, though. Clifford is also, like, not... I don't think Clifford is a real problem. I think that Towers deck is kind of a problem. Just because Towers is degenerate and it's pretty stupid that you can build a deck that's just aiming to turn 1 Towers you. But, I mean, every deck can play outs to Towers. You know, no one is forcing you to build a deck that can't deal with Towers, and if you just respect it, it'll phase out of the metagame eventually until then people take their techs out for it. So just be prepared to play against the Towers deck, and I don't think regular Klee is a problem. It's an annoying deck. I hate Klee, but if you're prepared to play against it and specifically to deal with the Towers since Wavering Eyes came out, I think that's not a problem either. Basically, last format was kind of ruined by the fact that Jin and Lava Chain were in it, so you couldn't really let the format shake out. You couldn't let it shape up in a way where deck A beat deck B, so on and so forth, because every deck just kind of lose to Nekroz being able to summon a Jin and lock you out of the game if they drew bad, or if they couldn't just grind you out. That deck was already very, very strong. You could play one of the best grind games in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it could also just lock you out for free. And some people, built their deck sort of with that in mind. Their game plan was to just lock you out for free. So I'm glad that we have kind of a slightly changed up version of last format. None of the changes are too drastic. These cards all barely matter that they've been touched. I think 7-star Sword is the one that's the most likely to see play at a 3 of. But for the most part, we're basically going to get the opportunity to see how last format would have shaped up if Nekroz was a little bit less good. And then on top of that, we're going to get to see maybe Mermails make an impact, maybe regular Trishula makes an impact, but I'm not 100% sure where other than Mermails, and maybe like a Mathematician deck with Glow Up Bulb, which I mean is feasible. That has like level 5 monsters or something. I don't know. I'm very curious to see where this card ends up, honestly. I like this card. It's a lot of fun to play with. I really like the plant format, so I hope it ends up doing something. But other than that, there weren't a ton of changes, but I think there was just enough to keep the format fresh and interesting. The last thing that I kind of wish would have happened would be a Royal Magical Library ban, because I don't really want to deal with Chicken Race all the time. Just dealing with FTK decks is no fun at all. And I think if you can build an FTK that consistently works without Library, you probably have built a very, very good deck, and you deserve it. And I say that at this point, knowing that Lava Chain is banned and stuff like that. But, like, going back forever to the Shadow Priestess of Ohm FTK deck, for instance, that was an FTK deck that worked without Library. That deck was impressive. And you were able to beat that deck with simple sideboard techs, like using Silva or Necomonic, because you were going to get to draw and discard a bunch of cards. And I think if there's an FTK deck that you can't beat with just simple sideboarding, there's a problem. And I think Library is one of the cards that really adds to that dilemma, since it just gives them so much access to their deck if they draw it. But I think it's going to be fine. I think just playing sideboard tech like Silva, Valor, Necomonic King, just depending on how their deck looks, will be enough to keep Chicken Race from being totally degenerate. And I think this format will be fine. All in all, I'm really looking forward to this format. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. Even with the minimal number of changes, I think it's very fresh or refreshing, and it'll be a very good change of pace. And the last thing I want to talk about is the lack of an end date again. I don't like that. I don't like that one bit. It's very hard as a player who wants to go to events to not know when you're going to get your next list. Like, if I wanted to go to an event that's at the end of next month, up to this point, I would have been in a spot of, well, I could playtest the current format, but I don't know if that's what I'm actually playing. And then all that testing might go to waste, or just I want to have the most time to prepare. And people will say, well, the best players excel with a small amount of prep time because they can come up with the best decks the fastest. And in part, that is true. But it's just so frustrating to be in that lull before the actual list comes out when you know there's going to be events soon. I think it's good for Konami because if they get into a pickle of, well, how do we fix this format from events towards the end of it, they're not stuck in a place where they've been finalized on the list for a month and something that comes out in the last month of the format really, really sticks it to them. Like, they don't know how to deal with it, and then they have to release a format that's not well-tuned. I like that in some ways from a design aspect and from a game balance aspect, but then there's the secondary market and stuff where it's very difficult to not know when bans are coming. It's reasonably predictable what kind of decks are going to get hit. Like, you had to assume Nekroz was going to get hit by the list this time in some capacity, and the deck would get worse. But when you don't know when the list is coming, it gets very hard to sort of plan when you want to and don't want to have these cards, which is a real first world problem. It's a vendor or like a big trader problem, but it kind of just sucks, you know, when you work at a store and it's like, I don't know if I can buy these cards because we don't have the list yet and we don't know when we're getting the list. I think it'll end up being okay though, and I see a lot of good it does for the game from a balance perspective, so I'm okay with it in that way. Other than that, I think this list is pretty cool. These are just my first reactions. I'll probably think about it a lot more. I'm going to make some decks, obviously. I'm just going to go start brewing pretty much immediately, honestly. So other than that, let me know what you guys think down below about the format. I'd be more than happy to talk about it, talk about changes that you would have liked to see or any of that. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel for lots of new content coming with the ban list. I'm going to be building decks and testing a lot, so just let me know what you guys want to see and what you think. Thanks a ton for watching, guys.